Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of the Hinterkaifeck Murders, a German farm family killed after reporting strange noises in the forest. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. In late March 1922, a farmer named Andreas Gruber began noticing strange things at his remote farm in Bavaria. He found an unfamiliar newspaper in the house. He found footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the farm, but none leading back. He heard footsteps in the attic at night. The previous maid had left in December, telling people she believed the farm was haunted and she was afraid. Andreas told neighbors about the footsteps and the newspaper, but no one came to investigate. On April 4, 1922, the new maid arrived for her first day of work. 6 people were at the Hinterkaifeck farm that day: Andreas Gruber, 63, his wife Cäzilia, 72, their widowed daughter Viktoria, 35, her 2 children Josef, 2, and Cäzilia, 7, and the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, 44, who had arrived that very afternoon. By the next morning, all 6 were dead. The bodies were not discovered for 4 days. When neighbors finally came to check on the farm, they found the adults and the little girl murdered in the barn with a pickaxe, and the toddler Josef and the new maid Maria murdered inside the house. The killer had been extraordinarily methodical. He had lured each victim to the barn one at a time, killed them, and arranged their bodies. After killing everyone, the killer had remained on the farm for several days. Evidence showed that the livestock had been fed, the fire had been kept burning, and food from the kitchen had been eaten. The killer had sat in the house with 6 bodies for at least 2 days before leaving. The Hinterkaifeck Murders remain Germany's most famous unsolved cold case. Over 100 suspects were investigated in the decades following the killings. The motive was never established. The murder weapon, the ruthor, a type of mattock or pickaxe, was found on the farm but yielded no fingerprints. The footprints in the snow that Andreas had reported weeks before the murders suggest the killer had been watching the farm or even living in the attic, as some investigators have proposed, for a significant period before the killings. Someone knew that farm, knew its routines, and planned the murders with extraordinary patience. They have never been identified. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we go further, if you are finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. If you are watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. If you found us through Facebook, tap follow on our page. It takes just a few seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep making these documentaries. Now, let us get back to the investigation. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the world of history's most enduring unsolved crimes, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. Every unsolved crime is a failure, not just of the investigation, but of memory itself. The witness who might have placed the suspect at the scene has died. The physical evidence has degraded or been lost in a storage room. The lead detective retired 30 years ago. The files exist, but the institutional knowledge that made them legible is gone. Cold cases are, in a very literal sense, history events that have receded from the living present into the documentary past, accessible now only through records, artifacts, and the unreliable memories of survivors. And yet cold cases do get solved. The history of forensic science is partly a history of cold case resolution. cases that sat dormant for decades until a new technology, DNA profiling, digital facial recognition, isotope ratio analysis, genealogical databases, provided the key that previous generations lacked. The Golden State Killer was identified 50 years after his first known crime by genealogical DNA matching. Multiple historic murders have been solved through mitochondrial DNA extracted from hair samples thought to be too old and degraded to yield any useful information. The past is not as sealed as it seems. What cold cases teach us about crime is often as important as solving them. They expose the limitations of investigative practice at their time, the tunnel vision that focused on the wrong suspect, the forensic contamination that destroyed evidence, the jurisdictional rivalry that prevented agencies from sharing information. Examining cold cases is an act of institutional self-examination, an attempt to learn, across decades, from the failures that allowed the perpetrator to walk free. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Hinterkaifeck Murders, a German farm family killed after reporting strange noises in the forest, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Hinterkaifeck farm was located in the municipality of Gruber in Bavaria, approximately 70 kilometers north of Munich. The farm was remote, accessible by a narrow dirt track through forest, and had a history of family scandal. Andreas Gruber had been convicted and imprisoned for incest with his daughter Viktoria, and Josef, the youngest child, was widely believed to be the product of this incestuous relationship. The social isolation and family scandal contributed to the family's limited connection with the surrounding community, which is one reason the bodies were not discovered for 4 days after the killings. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the murder weapon was identified as a Ruthor, a type of Bavarian agricultural mattock with a narrow, pick-like head, which was found at the scene. Forensic examination confirmed it had been used to strike all 6 victims in the head. The wounds were consistent with a single weapon and a single type of strike, suggesting all 6 murders were committed by one person acting systematically rather than 2 or more people acting simultaneously. The killer struck with considerable force, but not wild or frenzied violence. The crime scene was described by 1922 investigators as controlled rather than chaotic. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this. And that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. The weeks before the murders, Andreas Gruber reported to neighbors several anomalous events at the farm. A newspaper he had not purchased appearing in the house, footprints in the snow leading from the direction of the forest to the farmstead without return tracks, and the sound of footsteps in the attic at night on multiple occasions. The previous maid, Marie Baumgartner's predecessor, had left specifically because she was frightened of the farm. If the pre-murder evidence is taken at face value, the killer had been accessing the attic of the farm and possibly living there for weeks before the murders, suggesting extraordinary premeditation and familiarity with the property. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the post-murder behavior of the killer, remaining at the farm for multiple days, feeding the animals, consuming food from the kitchen, has no clear parallel in other documented murder cases. The most plausible interpretation is that the killer was waiting for something, possibly for a specific person to arrive, or to determine whether the murders would be discovered, or that the killer felt psychologically safe at the farm and had nowhere else to go. The feeding of the animals in particular has struck investigators as indicative of either a farmer accustomed to livestock care or a person who was psychologically comfortable in the farm environment. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of over 100 suspects were formally investigated across several decades of intermittent investigation. The most prominent suspects included a former farmhand who had worked at Hinterkaifeck and allegedly been in a romantic relationship with Viktoria Gruber, Lawrence Schlittenbauer, a local man who may have been Josef's biological father and who was among the first to arrive when the bodies were discovered. Critics note he behaved suspiciously at the scene, and various itinerant individuals who passed through the area. None was ever charged. A 2007 criminal profiling exercise conducted by the German Police Academy proposed characteristics of the likely perpetrator, but did not identify a specific individual. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. The skulls of the Gruber family victims were removed from their graves in 1924 for further forensic examination and were subsequently lost, a fact that has prevented modern DNA analysis from establishing family relationships with certainty or testing for any biological material from the perpetrator. The missing skulls are sometimes cited as evidence of a cover-up, but the more prosaic explanation is administrative incompetence during a period of political upheaval in Germany. The loss of the skulls represents a significant forensic setback for any future investigation, though soil samples from the grave sites may still contain recoverable biological material. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological errors. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Hinterkaifeck murders, a German farm family killed after reporting strange noises in the forest. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the Lawrence Schlittenbauer theory is the most developed specific suspect theory. Schlittenbauer, a local man with a romantic history with Viktoria Gruber, is alleged to have been the father of young Josef, creating a potential motive around inheritance or the family's ongoing scandal. He was among the first to arrive when neighbors came to check on the farm and was observed to behave in ways that some witnesses described as knowing where to look for the bodies. He also handled the murder weapon before police arrived, potentially contaminating evidence. Schlittenbauer denied involvement and was investigated but never charged. He died in 1941. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence. But it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the returning farmhand theory proposes that a former employee of the Hinterkaifeck farm, specifically one with a grudge related to dismissal, romantic rejection by Viktoria, or some unresolved dispute with Andreas ennead and executed the murders after a period of surveillance from the attic. This theory accounts for the weeks of preparation suggested by the pre-murder anomalies and for the killer's evident familiarity with the farm layout, routines, and livestock care. The German Police Academy's 2007 profiling exercise suggested a local individual with familiarity with the farm as the most likely perpetrator profile. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the obsessive stalker theory incorporates the extensive pre-murder surveillance suggested by the footprints and attic sounds, and proposes a perpetrator fixated on Viktoria Gruber, motivated either by romantic obsession or by the incest scandal that had made the farm and its inhabitants objects of neighborhood talk. Under this model, the killer had been watching and monitoring the farm for weeks or months before deciding to act, and the methodical nature of the killings reflects someone who had mentally rehearsed the crime many times before committing it. This psychological profile is consistent with organized, premeditated murder, but does not identify a specific suspect. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Hinterkaifeck Murders, a German farm family killed after reporting strange noises in the forest, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the pre-murder anomalies, the newspaper, the footprints with no return tracks, the attic sounds are the most important evidence for premeditation. These events were reported by Andreas Gruber to multiple neighbors before the murders, creating documented historical evidence of surveillance activity that precedes the killings by weeks. The absence of return footprints in the snow is particularly significant. If the intruder came from the forest and left no return tracks, either the tracks were made during a snowfall that covered them, or the intruder did not return to the forest after approaching, i.e., remained on the farm. This is consistent with the attic hiding theory. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested, The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented the post-murder behavior of feeding livestock and consuming food is physical evidence. Investigators documented that the animals had been fed and watered after the murders, and that food in the kitchen had been partially consumed. Both activities require purposeful action by a living person who was at the farm after the killings. The absence of any other potential actor, all 6 occupants were dead, means these actions were performed by the killer. The farmer-like competence implied by proper livestock care after committing 6 murders suggests either a person with agricultural background or a person who was psychologically dissociated from the violence they had just committed. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the skulls removed in 1924 for forensic examination, while subsequently lost, were at the time examined by Munich University forensic pathologists who confirmed the wounds were consistent with a Ruth mattock and delivered from a standing position to a crouched or prostrate victim, consistent with the luring and ambushing scenario. The angle and force of the wounds across all 6 victims was consistent, suggesting the same physical stature and striking technique in each case. This physical consistency supports the single killer hypothesis over a 2-person attack theory. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Hinterkaifeck Murders, a German farm family killed after reporting strange noises in the forest. Now, we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Hinterkaifeck Murders are Germany's most famous cold case and have been the subject of multiple German-language books, academic studies, and documentary films. A major 2007 project by students at the German Police Academy undertook a comprehensive cold case review using modern profiling and forensic methods, and concluded that the most likely perpetrator was a male local resident with prior connection to the farm and a personal motive related to the Gruber family's social situation. The project did not name a specific suspect. German authorities have not officially announced any plan to seek a resolution to the case, which falls outside the jurisdiction of modern cold case units due to its age and the deaths of all potential witnesses. Archaeological work at the Hinterkaifeck site in recent years has attempted to recover additional physical evidence from the farm foundation, which still exists in Gruber. Soil sampling has been proposed as a potential source of biological material from the perpetrator if DNA was deposited at the scene, but the degradation of organic material over a century in agricultural soil makes this approach extremely challenging. The loss of the skulls remains the greatest obstacle to any modern forensic investigation. What can be said with certainty about Hinterkaifeck is that the crime was planned with extraordinary patience, executed with grim efficiency, and followed by behavior that reveals a psychology unlike virtually any other documented murderer, someone who killed 6 people and then stayed to tend the farm as if nothing had happened. That psychology and the person it belongs to has never been identified. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Hinterkaifeck Murders, a German farm family killed after reporting strange noises in the forest from the historical record through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Hinterkaifeck ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence present in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.